Welcome back. So we've been on this journey, piecing together a massive global puzzle, finding the same ancient story in cultures that, for all we know, never even met. Today, we're looking at the final and maybe the most powerful piece of evidence yet. It's a single name for a single hero in a single flood, and it's echoed all over the world. This is a name that psychology just can't explain away and that history really can't ignore.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll do a quick recap of the structural arguments we've been building up. Then we'll get into the new stuff, the phonetic evidence. After that, we have to tackle the main counter-argument to this whole idea. And finally, we'll pull it all together and see what it all means.
All right, let's dive right in. Now, to really understand the power of a single name, we need to quickly revisit the foundation we've been building so far. You see, every single argument in this series, up until right now, has been about story structure.
We've shown again and again that the same five-part story, divine beings, forbidden knowledge, a hybrid race, a world-ending flood, and the final imprisonment of those beings, well, it just pops up in cultures that were completely disconnected. We saw it in ancient China, which is our perfect control group with no contact with the West. We saw it in Aboriginal Australia, isolated for 50,000 years. The skeleton of this story, it's identical everywhere.
But here's where we make a sharp turn. This is the crucial distinction. Everything so far has been about structure, the what of the story. And look, there's a potential counter-argument for that. You could say it's just shared psychology, archetypes. Maybe all human beings are just hardwired to invent similar myths. But this explainer, this one's different. This is about phonetics, it's about a shared proper noun, it's about the who of the story. And for that, psychology doesn't really have an answer.
And that brings us to the absolute core evidence for today, a cluster of names for the flood hero that are phonetically linked across languages that have nothing to do with each other. We're officially moving from the what of the story to the who.
Okay, this table right here, this is our roadmap. You can see this cluster of names from Noach in the Hebrew tradition to Nua in China and Manu over in India. For each of these, we're going to dig into where it came from, what it means, and this is the most important part, whether there was any possibility of historical contact. That last column is the key, because it's what's going to help us separate a real ancient signal from just, cultures borrowing stories from each other.
So let's start with the one we're probably all most familiar with, Noah, from the Hebrew tradition in the book of Genesis. He's our baseline, the name we're going to compare everything else against.
Now here's the critical part. His name isn't just a random sound. It's built on the Hebrew root nuach, which means to rest. The name itself is telling the story. The ark came to rest. The floodwaters came to rest. Humanity found rest. See? This isn't just a coincidence. It's a name that has this deep theological meaning baked right into the narrative itself.
Okay, now let's move on, because this is where things start getting really interesting. Let's talk about Nua, the flood hero from ancient China. And this is a potential game changer, because we know for a fact that China had no documented contact with the Near East before the Silk Road opened up around 130 BC. So any similarity we find here can't just be explained away by saying they borrowed it.
And this is where it gets fascinating. The second character in her name, Hua, is totally unique. It doesn't appear in any other word in the entire Chinese language. They created this character specifically for her. So think about that. In a completely isolated civilization, we have a flood hero whose name starts with that exact same N+ vowel sound, and it was so important that they literally invented a new character just for her.
Her story is structurally a match for Noah's. She's a flood survivor in some kind of vessel, and she repopulates the earth. When you put all that evidence together, Nua becomes maybe the most powerful piece of phonetic evidence in this entire cluster.
Okay, now, we have to be honest with the evidence. There's a name out there that looks like a perfect fit, but really, it isn't, and that's Nu'u from Hawaii.
The name Nu'u and his whole story, the great canoe, the rainbow, the sacrifice, it's incredibly close to Genesis. But scholars are pretty much certain that this story was shaped by Christian missionaries who showed up in the 1820s. So we're acknowledging it, but we're setting it aside. And by being rigorous and discounting this contaminated piece of evidence, our case for all the other names actually becomes much, much stronger.
Next up, we have a different but equally fascinating cluster. Manu in ancient India and Menes in pre-Christian Germany. In this case, the parallel isn't just about the sound of the name, it's about its function. These figures play the exact same role as the ancestor of all humanity.
So the name Manu comes from this ancient Proto-Indo-European root that means man or mankind. And here's the incredible part. The flood hero's name didn't just mean man. It became the actual word for man in tons of languages that came after, from German Mann to English man. I mean, think about that. That's what happens with remembered ancestors, not with fictional characters. An entire branch of humanity basically named itself after him.
So this brings us right to the central challenge we mentioned at the very beginning, the counter-argument from psychology and the absolute core idea of this entire explainer. So the big question is, couldn't this all just be shared psychology? Is it possible that the human mind, just all over the world, independently invents similar stories and even similar sounding names for its heroes?
And the answer lies in this one simple distinction: shared psychology. What Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. It can explain why we dream up archetypes, like a generic flood hero. But what it cannot explain is why totally isolated cultures would dream of a person with the same proper noun, the same name.
So here's the bottom line. An archetype is a what? It's a role, a pattern like the Great Mother or the Wise Old Man. But a shared proper noun, a name like Noach or Nua, popping up in isolated cultures, well, that points to a who. Archetypes are generated by the mind. Proper nouns are preserved by a culture as a memory. Archetypes don't have names. Memories do.
So what does this all mean? When we put the structural evidence from this whole series together with this brand new phonetic evidence, what's the final picture that emerges?
Well, the logic seems to lead here. First, we have the same story skeleton appearing all over the globe. Second, we find the skeleton in totally isolated cultures. Third, layered on top of that skeleton, we now find a phonetic fingerprint, the same proper noun also appearing in isolation. When you combine the shared what with the shared who, the evidence really points away from psychology and towards a common, fragmented memory of something that actually happened.
And that leaves us with a final and pretty provocative thought. What if the stories are all the same, not because our minds all work the same way, but because our ancestors all witnessed the same history? What if mythology isn't a collection of stories we invented, but a library of history that we've simply forgotten?